Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for watching, for listening, for following, for subscribing. I appreciate you all very much. I'm joined right now by special guest, man. Second time having him on the show, Alex Brasky, sports editor at the Batavia Daily. What's going on, buddy? How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. How about yourself? We're enjoying this beautiful Western New York weather. First day of spring was yesterday. Opening day of baseball today, and what do you know? We got inches of snow on the ground.
It's ridiculous, man. I hate it. I really do. Dude, you know, I know you've been up here your whole life up north. I've been up here with the exception of 5 years, my entire life. I'm not built for it, man. I'm not going anywhere, so I should probably stop whining like a little baby like I do every.
I've seen some of your tweets. You're thinking about going back down south. I don't know. We might see a different throw back down in the Panhandle down there.
Wishful thinking, buddy. It's not. It's not going to happen. But yeah, to your point, I did tweet about it actually today. It looks gorgeous outside. Like there's no wind right now. There's a little bit of snow on the grass. Like it's half green, half white. Very light snowfall. It looks scenic, like almost like a Hallmark movie. You know what I mean? It looks really nice. Then I go outside. I'm like, fuck this, man. It's cold, man. I'm gonna go start and have to warm up my car and brush off the back of it. It's March 20th, man. March 20th, 21st.
Right. That's what I was going to say. It'd be a very scenic day for, let's say, December 20th, leading into Christmas time.
Right.
But first day of spring and second day of spring, I'm not a fan of the snow.
No, not at all, man. All right, so listen, we're going to spend some time. We'll get there in just a few minutes here. We're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills offense, and I want to get some of your thoughts on maybe what your expectations are for how they look. And I'm not necessarily talking about just the personnel. Like, for the most part, I think that's set in stone right now. They're probably going to add a draft pick, a receiver, maybe even two every receiver. We'll see how that plays out. But I think for the most part, the personnel is set for the season. And I'm talking more about schematically, like how are they going to look? What kind of formations they're going to run? Is this going to be a team that continues to run the football a lot like they did last year, 2 tight end sets, stuff like that? Maybe we'll kind of squeeze in a little bit of Sabres talk here at the end as well. Before we get going, though, let me ask you this. Like I said, the first time we got together on this show, we did a live from Imperial show. That was a lot of fun. The Bill season's been over now for a while. It's heated up now with the off season. How have things been going for you since Bill's season ended?
Yeah, they're just starting to slow down now. We do a lot of high school sports coverage at the Batavia Daily News. So we had winter sports coverage really heating up over the past several weeks with sectionals and championships to be won and kids to honored. So that was a lot of fun. But now kind of settling into spring sports coverage, draft coverage for the Bills, and looking forward to that. So it's been a little bit slow over the past week or so, but kind of enjoying a little bit of a slower go here at the Batavia Daily News.
We talked about this a little bit the first time I had you on, but obviously it's not the same. Covering high school sports is obviously drastically different than covering the Buffalo Bills, of course. But that said, I miss covering high school sports. I did it before. It's fun, man. There's something about covering high school sports that just has always felt authentic to me. Like the players, the coaches, a lot of the families, the parents, the friends of the athletes, just the coverage that they get. You could just see, you get a sense of how much more it means to them when, hey, Alex Brasky's out from Batavia and he's covering this game. And if I play well, if I drop 22 and we win, he's probably going to want to talk to me after the game, get a couple quotes, stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's just covering the high school sports scene for me, at least. And I think for you as well, too. It's a lot of fun. It's different, but it's a lot of fun, isn't it?
Definitely. Very gratifying. And we do a lot of live streams here at the Batavia Daily News. So a lot of play-by-play and live coverage of the game. So that's been really fun. Since really the pandemic hit, we really ramp things up in that respect. So getting to do play-by-play for all these sports is really been an exciting time.
Do you like doing play-by-play?
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorite things to do. You really get to show your creativity, spread your wings, and really bring the energy every night. And you get to talk about other stuff on the air as well. Let's say you get a blowout in a game, you get to discuss some bills and brush up on that type of stuff. So it's a really, really fun environment. And the management staff here at the Batavia Daily News really lets me spread my wings. So it's been a lot of fun.
Do you, I've thought about that before. I've never done any broadcasting like games and stuff like that, but can that be a challenge sometimes when you're doing a game and maybe you expect it to be a tight game and then it just gets out of hand early and, the result is long been determined, but you still got to fill time. You got to keep people interested in continuing to watch, kind of come up with some storytelling of sorts.
Yeah, when I first started doing these live streams, that was certainly the most difficult aspect of them, because obviously in high school sports, you run into that quite often where one team is much better than the other. And around here, we try to keep both of the opponents within our coverage area. So sometimes you'll run into some blowouts. And when I first started, it was tough to maintain that energy through a blowout. But as you go, you learn it's just kind of part of the gig. And it really just becomes a skill, learning about other things to talk about throughout the broadcast and really, like I said, just maintaining that energy throughout. But yeah, certainly when I first started, it was mighty difficult to, let's say, call a 20-point game for 2 quarters in the second half of a basketball game. Certainly not what you hope when you go into a game.
I would imagine trying to do a baseball game as a broadcaster, that would be a skill in its own right too, because there's so much downtime in between action as opposed to basketball or football.
It's funny you say that. That's my favorite sport. You see here. Sorry, go Yanks. Go Yanks.
Yeah, video side Yankees. I'm a Yankees fan too.
But yeah, definitely my favorite sport, baseball, but not my favorite sport to call. I also umpire baseball a bit in the off season, and those games can get very long too. If you run into a 15-3 game, you can run into 2.5 hours or so. So it does get a little long and a little tough in those circumstances. But at the same time, if you get a fast-paced, good 3-2 baseball game, it can be really a lot of fun.
But before we dive into this, like I said, some specific Bills stuff here, covering high school sports the way you have, and now, like I said, you've been covering the Bills for a while. It's not like, you're brand new at it either, but just kind of elaborate a little bit to the audience, the difference between, say, you go in a locker room after a high school basketball game where these are high school kids. And again, they're a little bit, they're thirsty for some covers, for some pub. I played high school sports. Who wasn't? We all are when we play high school sports, as opposed to, say, you're covering a Bills Jets game and you're going into the locker room after. And these are quite literally $1 million athletes that are essentially celebrities. They're certainly celebrities, whatever town they play in, but just the kind of the mindset, the attitude, the vibe of a locker room professionally, as opposed to covering kids.
Yeah, I would say if you go into a high school locker room, you kind of have to guide some of the kids through the interviews, some of the conversations that you have with them. They may not be used to one-on-one interviews, and maybe their first time ever doing a one-on-one interview. So you might have to guide them through that conversation. But conversely, excuse me, with the professional athletes, you really let them guide you through the conversation and kind of let them take you where they want to go. And you're more of a listener in that regard. I like to keep my questions as short as possible with professional athletes, whereas with high school athletes, sometimes you have to ask compounded questions, and that allows them a little bit of time to think about their response and deliver the best response that they can.
Going into this offseason with, say before the cuts, before free agency, what were your expectations about this team realistically going in as opposed to what we've seen so far?
Yeah, it was my expectations were kind of what we have seen thus far. I thought it would be a slow go here during the offseason. I didn't think we'd see a lot of big splashes. I thought we'd see a lot of restructures. You've seen Josh Allen, Dawson Knox, Von Miller all restructure their deals, providing a lot of relief under the salary cap, and a few surprise releases, I would say. I'm not sure. I had it on my radar that Tre'Davious White might be released, but not sure I expected it with with his connection to the team and what he's produced for the team over the past several years, excuse me. But Jordan Poyer, maybe not a surprise with him aging and kind of dropping in production over the past, I would say last year, maybe his first year as a drop in production, and Micah Hyde likely not to be back. So a little bit of surprise there, but at the same time, kind of the status quo that I expected in order to get under that salary cap. But still work left to be done. Tre'Davious White's $10 million will come off the cap post June 1st. And you saw last year with Leonard Floyd, he was signed, I believe, on June 5th. So there haven't been big splashes yet. I don't expect anything huge. Some people were calling the Curtis Samuel signing a bigger splash, but I'm not sure I'd classify it in that tier. So maybe some bigger things to come, but I think it's gone as expected, kind of a slower, more moderate, modest offseason for the Bills.
You know, we talked about this the first time I had you on at Imperial Pizza. You grew up obviously a Bills fan. You kind of got to, remove that fandom when you're covering the team and be objective in your coverage with them. You see a guy like Jordan Poyer, and he gets released, which, he re-signed with the Bills last year. He got released. It's not like he was an unrestricted free agent off the get-go that could go wherever he wanted to. So he gets cut from the team. He signs with Miami, which you could just tell that's where he wanted to go. I'm sure it's where he wanted to go last year too, and maybe just the money wasn't there. They weren't interested, maybe at the time. Signs only a 1 year, $2 million deal. But anyway, you've seen a couple of videos. I mean, you're on social media of Jordan just seeming like he's in his glory right now, being in Miami, talking about it being home, talking about the palm trees. I think he was on Pat McAfee's show a couple of days ago, talking about being able to drive to a game in his Lamborghini, something he was never able to do in Buffalo, stuff like that. You could just tell he's happy. And then you look at the Bills and the Dolphins and that rivalry, and they hate each other. Kind of feel like, and you can see fans already, and it's only March, dude. It's only March. And you can see fans are kind of turning a little bit, and they're already annoyed with that. And I'm sure when the season ramps up, it's going to get much more intensified. But hearing a guy who was, the fabric of the Buffalo Bills for 7 years, saying fins up and having a Dolphins head on and talking about palm trees behind him, the fan is like, it's tough to take. Although it's not his fault, because again, he wasn't a free agent. Your boy got cut, and this is where he went to continue playing in his career. But still, it's a little tough to see sometimes as a fan.
Yeah, I think there were some hints that he kind of wanted to play there last year. I think you hinted that at that last offseason when he was a free agent looking for that big money deal. Didn't get the chance to. Right. Came back with the Bills. Now the Bills let him go and didn't sign that lucrative of a contract with the Dolphins. And I think it's a situation where, like, let's say you break up and on social media with your ex, you're not going to post that you're all set. You're going to post that you're happy. You're going to, but I'm not so sure that Jordan Poyer is in a situation where he certainly wanted to be in at this point of his career, making, I think, just a couple $1 million on a 1 year contract. But you did see Saran Neal also go down to the Dolphins. I'm sure the enticement of playing the Bills twice during the regular season certainly fueled those two going down south. Kind of a revenge factor there against your former teammates, your former coaches. But yeah, Jordan Poyer's productivity, although he was a team-first guy this past season, really playing in the box after Milano went down and playing as that pseudo linebacker role, I'm not sure the production was there on the back end from a safety perspective, and I think it was time to move on from him, particularly with the cap savings that the team got with his release. So I think it worked out for the Bills, and it seems, if you look at it at face value, it worked out for Jordan Poyer, but at the same time, I'm sure he'd like to be making a little bit more money to be playing this season and maybe have a little bit more security as well in terms of a longer term deal.
Yeah, 1 year, $2 million. I mean, that's not even a you're guaranteed to make this roster type of contract. He's a starter for now, but I mean, they're maybe drafting a second or third round safety away from that potentially changing sooner than later. I will say, looking at it unbiased, I do think Jordan Poyer, even though the prime of his career is long gone, I think he's still a serviceable player. He's not the Jordan Poyer, the all-pro level player, and I don't even think that's really disputable. But I do think what he's going to bring to that football team, if I'm being objective here, is leadership. And I remember last year talking about this when the Bills beat them in the season finale to win the division. I remember watching Hard Knocks to Miami because Miami was covered on it in season. And I wasn't a fan of the show, and I didn't watch the first 5-6 episodes, but I did watch the one where the Bills beat them. And I remember saying to myself, where the hell's the leadership on this football team? I mean, Miami's up in the locker room at the half, and you just see it in the locker room, and there's not a lot of going on in their locker room, not a lot of talking. Tua's not a leader. He's a pretty good quarterback. He's not a leader. That team just lacks leadership and a voice. And I feel like that is something that Jordan Poyer will bring to the Dolphins. Maybe not even so much what he does on the field, but I think him being a leader will be helpful to them off the field and in the locker room.
Yeah, and if you look at it at the other side of the coin from a Bills perspective, the leadership you're losing in Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, I think that's certainly the most significant loss that you're incurring with their departure. Taron Johnson becomes the elder statesman in that secondary now in terms of his tenure with the team. I know Reginald Douglas, also a veteran, but in terms of leadership in that locker room and a steady voice that's been there over a number of years in that system, Taron Johnson is the guy now, and he's your nickel cornerback. So we'll see how that all works out. We'll see who takes the bull by the horns. I know Christian Benford, kind of a underspoken guy, doesn't really say a lot and really more of a quiet mentality or demeanor, excuse me. But we'll see who steps up in that regard. You still have Kyer Elam pushing his way for playing time. You have the change in cornerbacks coach there. John Butler leaves, a new voice in that room. So maybe it helps him take a step forward, but certainly a lot of changes in the secondary in terms of that voice. Or those voices from Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. And yeah, the Dolphins certainly the benefactor of getting that veteran leadership from Poyer. Although I said his productivity has taken a step back, certainly his impact in that locker room was not lost last year.
Yeah, for sure. Let's kind of flip sides here and get into what I think the premise of today's episode I kind of wanted to focus around. And that's let's assume the Bills don't go wide receiver at 28, because I am not convinced at all that that's what they're going to do now. But I kind of want to dive in a few things, and this is about the look of the offense. I want to pull up a tweet. I'm going to read this. This is from our mutual buddy, Aaron Quinn from Cover One. He put out a tweet earlier this week, and I want to read what he said and then get your reaction from it, and then we'll kind of get into a few specifics about it. But Aaron said, and I quote here, last year there were a lot of pushback and people becoming anti-12 personnel. I believe these people are going to have to get ready to be angry and fight against it again this year when the Bills lean more into condensed sets, bigger personnel packages, and ones that include an extra offensive lineman. That's the trend of the NFL, combating smaller, faster defenses, playing softer zone coverages. By the way, it's what the Bills do. And the Bills have had success at it. Do you see that kind of trend going with the Buffalo Bills? Because it's a step. I don't want to say it's a step back because it's not necessarily a step back. It's different than what we saw, say, 2020, 2021 with the Buffalo Bills, where it was sling the ball all over the field with Josh Allen. And maybe you run a little bit to keep the defense honest. 3-4 receiver sets all the time. And now, kind of like I said, starting last year, that shifted some. I looked at the Buffalo News, an article there. I'll make sure I give them credit. But they ran 12 personnel 17.1% of the time last season, and it was only 4.1%. And I suspect that might have even been higher if Dawson Knox didn't miss time with his injury. But you look at the Bills' offense right now, and do you see that trend with the head coach, Sean McDermott? You know that's what he wants, to run the ball, be more balanced. But just a team that's going to run the ball, try to get bigger, and just have more of a balance as opposed to let's, run and gun and spread it out and sling it all over the place.
Yeah, you saw a trend that way last year with the promotion of Joe Brady to interim offensive coordinator. The numbers just spoke for themselves, the amount of that they ran the ball compared to with Ken Dorsey as offensive coordinator and James Cook taking a step forward. And you really see it throughout the NFL with the way the running back market kind of shifted this year with Saquon Barkley getting a bunch of money and a couple of these other guys getting big money. I think the running back and the role that position plays on offense is maybe becoming more valuable over the past couple of years. And you saw the Bills last year use the jumbo tight end, David Edwards, who's since reportedly going to move to guard. So they'll have to fill that role, but I expect them to utilize that personnel as well. So it's always interesting to see how things change from year to year. But if you look at last year, how things kind of developed with Joe Brady as offensive coordinator and the usage of David Edwards and really how things are trending overall, I think that is to be expected. And the signing of Curtis Samuel, he's also a threat in the running game. I believe he had 40 carries for 200 yards and a couple of touchdowns during that 2020 season with Brady as his offensive coordinator in Carolina. So I think they're set to give him the ball a bunch. So yes, I think they're going to utilize that running game and really find different ways to get both of those tight ends on the field at the same time.
Do you feel like this is the offense? And I'm not saying he demanded that this was going to be the offense. Maybe the personnel dictates it more than anything. But do you think this is the mindset that Sean McDermott as a head coach wants? Like maybe he was uncomfortable with Josh Allen throwing the ball 35 to 40 times a game or throwing it, chucking it downfield a lot and running those 3 receiver sets because, I mean, it's not a big dip, but again, credit here to the Buffalo News looking at the stats. 70% of the time in 2022, they ran 3 receiver sets. It dipped to 64.2% over this past year. So again, more 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, or more that 6 offensive linemen, which was David Edwards. Don't know how that's going to play out. Maybe Alec Anderson might be your early on prime candidate to kind of take over that spot this year. But do you feel like this is what Sean McDermott really, really wants? Like this, he's a defensive head coach, and he wants to control the ball, the clock, maybe Josh Allen a little bit. This is what he wants offensively.
That's certainly been the talk of Bills fans since he took over as head coach. They've always believed that he's wanted a kind of ground and pound style, but at the same time, if you listen to the players, they don't seem to echo that sentiment. Josh Allen in his post season comments said that McDermott has never really played that role in the offensive room. So I think he just wants them to score points. He says it all the time, and this last year, I think you really saw it transition into that running game. And I'm not sure it's a product of just simply wanting to run the ball. I think the Bills just need to find other ways to create offense rather than relying on their quarterback. And I think the best way to do that last year was utilizing James Cook out of the backfield and running behind that strong offensive line that built that continuity, starting all 17 games together and missing very few snaps along the way. So I think it was more of a product of necessity and what the team was best suited for this past season, and maybe that develops into something different this year and into the future. You never know.
Running the ball too. They did run it more effectively last year. And again, I want to keep, citing credit here where it's due. The Buffalo News. I read a really good article analyzing statistically how their offense was last year, and they ran the ball to the outside too a lot more effectively this past year than 2 years ago. I read James Cook had like more than 200 yards rushing to the outside than Devin Singletary did for the Bills the year before. But going with this bigger body, bigger package, like to Aaron's point in his tweet about smaller zone-based coverage defenses. Like I said, the Bills, they're a perfect example. They play Teron Johnson pretty much as their third linebacker. Do you think that might have played a role? Like you talked about some of the cuts earlier and Trey White and Jordan Poyer. To me, the big surprise was Mitch Morse, because I thought he would either just be back and play out his last year, or maybe they redo his deal or something, but they cut him. And primarily, he's a salary cap casualty. I guess that's what we'll call him. But do you think maybe the Bills wanting to get bigger on the offensive line had something to do also with Mitch Morse getting cut? Because Connor McGovern he's only about an inch taller, so about the same height. But Connor McGovern weighs like 25 pounds more than Mitch Morse at center. So now you got McGovern at center and you got Edwards at guard, which makes the Bills bigger on the offensive line. You think size and wanting to get bigger at center might have had something to do with Mitch Morse getting released as well, besides the money?
Yeah, I think maybe bigger, stronger, younger, and less costly, more inexpensive. So I think all those things combined really played a role in Mitch Morse's release. $8.5 million saved
Sure.
against the cap by moving on from him. And he's entering his age 32 season, so not really getting any younger. You're going to have to make this move at some point. He had been Josh Allen's center, I believe, since the 2019 season, so there had been some continuity there, but you were going to have to pull off that Band-Aid at some point and get Josh Allen a new center and maybe build some new continuity with that new snapper. So we'll see how it all works out. David Edwards played a solid role for the Bills at jumbo tight end last year, and a lot of people thought he was a starting caliber guard when they acquired him last offseason. And Connor McGovern was brought to Penn State to be a center, I believe I read. I think it was the Tim Graham article from The Athletic. Mm-hmm. He went to Penn State to be a center. He was drafted to be a center. He's really played guard a lot throughout his career, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have center capability. So I think it's a move that the Bills are comfortable making. We'll see how it works out. One question that I have is they did have all that continuity last year and something that you wanted to build on. And now Deion Dawkins, another line mate on the left side for another year. I believe he's had a different guard next to him every year of his career, if I'm not mistaken. So some changeover there. It was, like I said, we'll see how things work out. But I think these are moves that the Bills were comfortable making. I think they have adequate players to shift in and replace Morris at center and then replace McGovern at guard. So we'll see how it all works out.
You make a great point too, talking about the offensive line last year and the continuity. I mean, far and away, this was Josh Allen's best offensive line he's ever had in his career last year, and nobody got hurt. All 5 guys played all 17 games. They started all 17 games. They played almost all the snaps. The only time they came out, maybe a little ding up for a couple plays or a blowout, but that line was their line all year. And I'm one of those guys, by the way. You mentioned David Edwards. A lot of people thought he was a starting caliber guard. I do. So I kind of like the move in terms of him being the guard. Just a little bit wary of Connor McGovern playing center. He's wanted to play center. That was another thing that came out in Tim's sit-down conversation with Connor. He's wanted to play center. Just the opportunity hasn't been there. He's played 100 snaps, I think, in the NFL at center. Not a lot. We'll see how things play out. But I will say this, too. I do think, at the end of the day, of course he thinks this, but Sean McDermott's primary goal is to not turn the ball over. And that's something last season was like almost night and day with the Bills, because the first 10 games, they had 18 giveaways, which was the most in the entire NFL. And then over the last 10 games, or the next 9 games, I should say, they only had 9 or 10 takeaway or giveaways, which was second best in the NFL. Of course, that's partially on your quarterback. I mean, there's just some head-scratching interceptions from Josh Allen early in the season. Do you think that maybe going into this offseason, knowing what your offense is probably going to be, with Josh Allen maybe learning lessons last year? Because I think there were times where maybe he got impatient with the structure of the offense, not being able to throw the ball on the field as much and kind of taking some unnecessary chances and maybe some bad reads, because maybe he was getting a little bit greedy and unselfish at times. Maybe an offseason with Joe Brady now here, knowing that your offensive coordinator all offseason long, that might help Josh kind of be a little more patient and stay within the structure of this offense.
Yeah, also getting some weapons in here that can create a bit more separation, which it appears Curtis Samuel is going to be able to do. If you look at a lot of the metrics, that's one of the things that he's best at, creating that separation. But I think last year it was a lot of just not a lot of receivers running open for Josh Allen, and maybe a little bit of miscommunication between him and Gabe Davis played a role as well. You saw that often. Gabe Davis, a down year last year, and a lot of that was due to that miscommunication with Josh Allen. They never just seemed to get on the same page, and if you have a number 2 receiver out there that you're not on the same page with, you're going to be forcing things. You're going to be caught in some unfortunate situations. And also, Josh Allen was asked to throw the ball quite a bit last year. And if you're throwing the ball that often, you're bound to throw some interceptions. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I was one of probably the fiercest critics of Josh Allen last year. A lot of people taking the onus off of him in terms of his turnover happy play. But I really thought a lot of those interceptions were avoidable, especially in those big situations where he would just force a pass into coverage or off his back foot or with pressure in his face. And I think those things can be avoided. And maybe having a full off season with Joe Brady in his ear, kind of taking the reins of the offense, you mentioned it, maybe that'll help him settle in and have him move forward into 2024 a little bit more mistake-free, I should say.
Before we take a quick break here, so Gabe Davis leaves for Jacksonville, and the Bills, by definition at least, have a void at their wide receiver 2 position. You know, that boundary guy, that big guy. And you would think, all right, this team wants to get a guy who's going to replace Gabe Davis. I mean, they did sign Matt Collins, and he's a good line. He's a good blocker, and he can do some things well, and he's a special teams guy. But he's not a wide receiver 2. Do you feel like maybe the conception of at least for the as it pertains to the Buffalo Bills, for what a wide receiver 2 should be, another Gabe Davis type, do you think that maybe might be more fan or media driven than maybe team driven? Like, we're all assuming that the Bills are going to get a big guy who can make contested catches and stretch the field, who's also, like I said, a big guy. I keep saying big guy because that's what we think they're looking for. But is that a given? Like, is it possible that they might go to the draft and they might get themselves another Curtis Samuel or Stefon Diggs type of receiver as opposed to, say, a Gabe Davis big dude?
Yeah, I certainly don't think it's a given, but I think they would like a Gabe Davis style player, perhaps in his size and ability and run blocking and physicality in that regard. And a couple guys that the Bills have been linked to, you've heard it, Donnie Mitchell and Brian Thomas Jr., they kind of fit that build. But at the same time, there's other players that don't fit that build that are going to be around where the Bills pick at number 28 and perhaps beyond. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Bills decide to do. But I don't think that they're locked into a certain style or structured player when they're looking for a pass catcher. I think they, as always, it sounds cliche, looking for the best player available, just looking for somebody who can come in and make that immediate impact that they're looking for that they didn't get from Gabe Davis last year.
All right, we're going to take a real quick break and going to be back. Plenty more here with Alex Brasky. All right, I am back here with Buffalo Bills reporter Alex Brasky. All right, so, before the break, we kind of talked about what this offense is probably going to look like. And I think we're both reasonably confident they're going to have plenty of big looks, bigger packages, even more 2 tight end sets, 12 personnel, 12 personnel, which I said they ran 17% of the time last year. I think that number is going to go up some this year as well. I said early in the show, I thought at one point the Bills were going to draft a wide receiver in the first round. And Curtis Samuel, to some extent, changed that for sure. But I think it's just more than Curtis Samuel because I don't think it's about wide receiver 2. I think it's about weapons. And when you look at the Bills, you realize that even with the Stefon Diggs talk aside on how good he still is, Bills got themselves some weapons, man. I mean, Dalton Kincaid comes out last year, first round pick, 73 catches, a Bills all-time record for a tight end and the 4th most by any tight end in a rookie tight end in NFL history. I think that's going a little bit under the radar. Like, we're spending so much time talking about Donnie Mitchell and Brian Thomas Jr. and Xavier Worthy and Stefon Diggs, his cryptic tweets, and, does he got any juice left in the tank? I kind of feel like how good Dalton Kincaid last year as a rookie goes a little bit under the radar. I mean, this is a dude who quite possibly, just after his second year next season, he could be a top 5 tight end in the NFL, man.
Yeah, and much like I said that the Bills, I don't think are locked into a certain structured player at the wide receiver position. I don't think they're locked into taking a wide receiver there at all. I think a position to watch would be along the defensive line. I know Daniel Jeremiah mocked a defensive lineman for the Bills last night. I think it was the guy from Florida State, Braden Fiske, if I'm
No, I think he mentioned Fiske by name, and he mentioned Jenkins from Michigan by name. I think Newton, I think, was the defensive tackle. But yeah, he mocked the defensive tackle, and he did mention Fiske by name too.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of due to the free agent market where it sits right now. There's really not a lot of help out there when you're looking at defensive linemen, especially on the interior. So I think if the Bills are going to fill in their depth at that position, it's going to come through the draft. So I'd definitely be on the lookout for them taking one at the top with their first round pick and maybe with a couple of picks in the draft, because you saw all they lost along the defensive line. Poona Ford goes out the door. Jordan Phillips goes out the door. Tim Settle goes out the door. You have your starters pretty much intact with Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, A.J. Epinesa / Von Miller, and then Greg Rousseau. But beyond that, Cameron Klein, Kingsley Jonathan, Eli Yanku. Yeah, there's not a lot of confidence to be inspired behind them. So I think if you're going to fill out the depth at that position, you're going to have to do it through the draft. And maybe it does come with their first overall pick, as Jeremiah mocked last night.
Now, as things stand at this moment, I might be willing to bet that maybe even 2 of the first 3 picks that the Bills make are going to be on the defensive line. Much of the chagrin, I'm sure, of a lot of Bills fans out there. And I should preface this too. I should have actually prefaced this at the very beginning of the show. Alex and I are taping this for Thursday. We're taping this Wednesday late morning, headed towards lunchtime. It is possible that the Bills end up doing something of significance here on Wednesday afternoon. So if that does happen, you're like, well, what the hell? I didn't even talk about this guy or this move. Well, it's because we already taped this show. I just wanted to put that out there. Back to the Bills' weapons, though, because again, so much is talked about with a first-round receiver and what his role would be, and what's up with Stefon and all that other stuff. We just mentioned Kincaid. You brought up James Cook earlier. Dude was 4th in the NFL in rushing last year, man. And with respect to Devin Singletary, he was just an upgrade last year. At his moments, some bad drops too in the passing game, couple, mental mistakes for sure. But James Cook is a certified weapon now. Dalton Kincaid is a certified weapon now. Khalil Shakir is a guy that I really like a lot. He came on last year, 23 catches over his last 5 games. He's seeing his role grow with the Bills, or at least that's what we think. I don't know what Curtis Samuel coming might mean for him per se, but you got Shakir, you got Cook, you got Kincaid, you got Curtis Samuel, you got Josh Allen with his legs, by the way, and you got Stefon Diggs. That's what makes me say, Alex, there's one football. And I don't even mention Dawson Knox, by the way, who's making a lot of money. They're going to try to get him involved in this offense again, like he was maybe a couple of years ago. It's only one football. Like, how important is a wide receiver 2 going to be? And as a follow-up, if they were to go Thomas Jr. or Mitchell or Worthy or Franklin or one of these at the top receivers in the first round, maybe even the second round too, for that matter. We'll go to second round too. Do you think that's drafted more now at this point because of the offense and their weapons? That might be, hey, this is going to be Stefon Diggs' potential replacement. They're making the move as much for that reason as they are, he's going to come on the field early in the season and help this offense be better.
Well, I certainly think you have to keep that in mind if you're the Bills somewhere along the line here, how you're going to eventually replace Stefon Diggs, potentially. I know there's been a lot of talk about, are the Bills going to trade him? And it doesn't seem financially possible at this point, but down the road, there's always going to be those discussions, and you have to keep that in mind going into this draft. And also, I do think having that number 2 receiver, that X receiver, is really critical in a high-powered offense, especially with a big arm like Josh Allen. You got to find somebody who can beat cornerbacks down the field and really win those one-on-one battles for the jump ball deep down the field. We saw Stefon Diggs come up short on one of those in a big situation last year. I think Trent Sherfield in the same game or a different game in the playoffs. So you really need that player that can go deep down the field and win those jump ball opportunities and just out physical people down the field. And right now, I don't think the Bills have that at their disposal. But at the same time, you're right. They do have plenty of weapons. They do have enough to get by, I would say, as a productive offense, especially bringing in a Curtis Samuel, giving you a little bit different of a look there, and maybe running him off the edge as well, as I mentioned earlier. And yeah, the progression of Dalton Kincaid still to come, and hopefully Dawson Knox bounces back with a more healthy year. But yeah, I think that X receiver is critical. But as you said, I wouldn't be surprised if they do go defensive line in particular, with that first round and maybe second round pick.
It's just not going to play well with Bills fans. You just know it's not going to.
Mel Kiper, I think, mocked a cornerback for the Bills. So I don't think a lot of people would be happy about that at all.
I love Mel Kiper, man. I think his time may come. I don't know how much how much attention.
Hey, he was spot on with Josh Allen.
He was. Well, it was 7 years ago.
Right. That was almost a decade.
And all due respect to Mel, man, I mean, he's an icon. I question his sanity if he's seriously thinking that the Bills are going to take a corner when you look at this roster, how it is. I hate to beat a dead horse when it comes to Stefon Diggs. I really do. But I got to ask you this. All right. So now we could speculate and have opinions on, is Stefon happy? Is Stefon unhappy? There's cryptic tweets, just him just being Stefon. Is he having some fun? Does he know that putting these tweets out, it's to get a reaction from media and fans? Those are all opinions. We all have our opinions. Theirs was not an opinion, though. I mean, the numbers statistically, they dropped near the end of last season. Only had like 69 catches over his last 13 games. Just not, I don't need to tell you the numbers. We watched it. They fell off. And you go into this year. So let's just say Kincaid continues to evolve, and Shakir continues to evolve, and Samuel carves out a nice little role with this team, and James Cook is going to be top 5 to 10 in rushing again, and Josh's going to run the ball, yada, 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 yada. That's going to mean potentially more of what we saw in the back half of the season, because if all those other things are going, Stefon Diggs ain't going to be getting 15 targets, 10, 11 receptions a game. And by the way, that's not to mention a potential number 2 receiver coming in the draft early on. Do you have concerns about how Stefon Diggs will handle going from the guy, the primary guy, to what I think could potentially be almost more of a complimentary role for the Buffalo Bills this season? Knowing him, and again, you've spent some time around him, do you have concerns about how he may handle not being the guy on this team?
I would say as long as they're winning, I wouldn't have too much concern. But if there's some turbulence like you saw during last season in terms of some tough losses and he's not as involved as he wants to be, yeah, I think there might be some squeaky wheel getting the grease situation there. And last season, something turned. You had that hot start, and whether it was defenses playing him different, the increase in the running game usage, whatever it was, something changed, and Stefon Diggs was not implemented in the offense as much as he was to begin the season. And I have no problem ranking him as one of the top wide receivers in the league. I think he still has that talent. Obviously, he showed it at the beginning of last year. The question that I have is why wasn't he involved as heavily? And I think that relies on the play caller. I think that just has to come down to Joe Brady finding a way to get a player like Stefon Diggs involved in the offense and maybe taking some of the attention away from him at times in order to open things up for him. I don't think it should be difficult to get a player of Stefon Diggs' capability involved in the offense, which it became increasingly more difficult for the Bills to do as the season progressed last year.
Good point. And that's the thing too, man. It's like, look, Kincaid's good. Shakir's getting there. Samuel's pretty good. Cook's good. You got these guys. Stefon Diggs is still your best playmaker. He's your best receiver, and it's not really particularly close. And it's almost kind of weird and at times frustrating as somebody who, follows the Bills, who likes the Bills. What he's done over the last 4 years is just unbelievable. They have more than 100 receptions 4 straight years, which, by the way, I found this out. I talked about on yesterday's show. He's one of only 4 receivers in the history of the NFL to ever have 4 straight seasons of at least 100 catches. It's crazy. Antonio Brown did it 6 straight years with Pittsburgh. Marvin Harrison did it 4 straight years with Indy. 4 straight years with Indy. Devontae Adams has done it 4 years in a row and counting. And Stefon Diggs has done it 4 years in a row and counting. we spent so much time talking about this guy's tweets and, his drop off, because I mean, that's a fair point though from last year. Point remains though, I still feel he's one of the best receivers still in the NFL. And you got to find a way to get him the football more. That's what it comes down to. He's just too good to not get him the football more. And it kind of felt like the Bills at times, for their success on offense, it kind of felt like, I don't know if it was by design or what, but it got away from him too much. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that's where that number 2 wide receiver comes into play, that X wide receiver. When the Bills were clicking on all cylinders over the past few years, it was when Gabe Davis was making a significant impact, or maybe Dawson Knox during that big year that he had. When the Bills had another option in the passing game, when Cole Beasley was doing his work, when the Bills have another steady option in the passing game to go to. I know that Dalton Kincaid certainly took a step toward becoming that this past year.
Yeah.
That's when Stefon Diggs can be unleashed. I don't think he's a player like a Kelvin Johnson, where no matter who you put on him, he's going to play his role as well as anybody in the offense, but you need more around him to kind of complement him and unleash his full capability. And I think that's what the Bills are going to be looking for at the top of the draft. I don't think it's a guarantee that they take a wide receiver, but I think if it went their way, a Brian Thomas would fall to them at number 28.
I look at Stefon too, and I feel like it could go so many different ways this year, man. You can look at it and say, well, the Bills got all these weapons that could take some of the attention away from Stefon, who can then have another huge year. He can have 100 catches again. He could also be a guy who started to fade out. He is 31 years old, and maybe he's not going to be the same player he was. He could be a guy that's going to be fine with it as long as they win, or he could be a dude that's just going to be really unhappy and make some noise about it. Who the hell knows? Financially, it's almost impossible to trade him, even if they wanted to. Like, let's say they get Brian Thomas Jr. and they say, you know what? We're going to eat some money right now. We got Samuel Kincaid, blah, 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 Brian Thomas Jr. Let's move on from this potential distraction. I don't think that's the case. I'm just putting out a hypothetical, by the way. It's possible they could trade him in the summer and eat a lot of dead cap money. It's not unheard of for teams to do that. I don't think it's going to happen. Or, of course, they could more realistically get out of his contract after this season. Dude, I'm just saying, I feel like it's just such a mystery with him. Like, he's like the X factor of this team still to me.
He's sort of an enigma, that's for sure. At least from the outside looking in. I think with his teammates and his coaches, I think he does enough to. I don't want to phrase this the wrong way, as if he's a phony character. I think he gets on the good side of his teammates and his coaches. He is a leader in that locker room, and I think he does enough to really create that fondness between he and his teammates and coaches. But there are some things that he does on the outside that kind of make the fans question maybe his loyalty to the team, and I think maybe that's where the quote unquote problem. I don't think it's maybe a problem for the Bills, but a problem in the fans' mind. I think that's where the problem lies with Stefon Diggs, or maybe the distraction, as you said. Maybe it's the constant topics on First Take created by some of his tweets and really that are pretty vague, to be quite honest with you. He never really comes out and says anything firm that you can latch onto. It's always things that you're left guessing at. Or maybe the one action after the playoff game where he stormed out of the locker room. Maybe that's one thing you can point to that he did. But a lot of this stuff is vague and it leaves you guessing. So it really leaves him as sort of an enigma on this team. And it's going to be interesting to see how this season develops. I think this season, how it goes, will really tell the tale, obviously, of how his future with the team will be. I don't think there's anything going to happen during this offseason or during the season. I think we'll get through this season with Stefon Diggs on the team, and depending on how it goes this next offseason, maybe a decision will have to be made.
Well, I really hope it works out with him. Again, he's one of my favorite players. I love watching the dude play. I love what he brings to the table. I love his productivity. I'm of the belief that the back half of the season was a little bit of not a complete anomaly, but a little bit of an anomaly. I think that might have had more to do with Joe Brady taking over in season and just trying to be a little more balanced and running the football more and getting other guys involved instead of being as one-dimensional. And I think with an off season to kind of put everything together, I think you'll see Stefon, even if he gets like 85 to 90% of what his production has been with the Bills over the last 4 years, that would be absolutely fantastic. As we wind down here, I want to get your thoughts, at least on one of them, because yesterday on the show, I outlined what I thought were the 5 biggest burning Buffalo Bills question marks as things stand. A lot of it we've already covered. We've talked about Stefon Diggs today. We talked about Connor McGovern moving to center. I consider that a question mark just because we haven't seen it, and we saw a good offensive line last year. I talked about yesterday keeping Josh Allen healthy. That doesn't warrant a discussion. That's obvious. Josh goes down, bam, season over. You do what you got to do and hope that he can stay healthy.
No faith in Trubisky, huh?
Come on, man. I have faith if they're playing, the Indianapolis Colts in a November game for a week or, a couple games like that. But long term, no. But I would say the same thing if it was Pat Mahomes, it was Joe Burrow and Cincy, which we saw last year. Your franchise guy goes down, you're done. Yeah. Anyway, my point was just keeping him healthy because he just plays like a crazy son of a bitch. So that's always a concern. He's durable, he's strong, but sooner or later, you're like, that damn might crack, Anyway, that we don't really need to talk about that. I talked about the defensive line depth being lousy. We talked about that, which I'll add. You mentioned some guys getting out of town. They all stunk last year anyway in terms of production. Sorry, I'm just going to say what it is, though. Tim Settle didn't get it done. Boone Ford didn't get it done. Jordan Phillips would get it done, and then he'd make up for it with 2 penalties and a whiff tackle. Linval Joseph, with all due respect, like the dude, he could have just stayed on the couch. It wouldn't matter. You know what I mean? There was not a lot behind their starters last year. So to me, that's their number one question mark right now. They got to get better there. Draft, a trade, because there's not a lot of free agents out there at this point at that position. But what I did want to ask you about, because we haven't talked about this, so we'll put a wrap on the Bills with this. Von Miller, is he trustworthy to you right now to produce sacks? Because it feels to me what the Bills have done basically with the defensive end position is let Leonard Floyd walk. And I mean, he went and got a big bag with Frisco. Good for him. And he was up front. He said that's what he wanted from the get-go. But you bring back Ebenezer, you got Rizzo. I feel like Von Miller, their expectation for him this season is to be what Leonard Floyd was last year. Maybe get you 10 to 11 sacks. And again, they're not going to go out. I don't think they're going to go out and go get themselves an explosive pass rusher. In free agency, there's not a lot out there anyway. Maybe they take one very early in the draft. But even so, might take some time to get him going. The Bills are trusting Von Miller, was what I'm telling you, to be Leonard Floyd last year. That's one of my question marks. How do you feel about Von right now with an entire offseason of being healthy?
Well, you're saying that the Bills are expecting 10 sacks. So is Von out of himself. He certainly bet on himself with the restructure of his contract this offseason. Yeah. I believe he gave back $8.5 million, but with sack and playtime incentives, he could potentially make more than he was set to make this year before giving that money back. I believe those incentives start to kick in at 6 sacks, somewhere around there. So if he's up around 6 to 10 sacks, I think he and the Bills would be happy with that, especially considering the lack of production that he provided last year coming back from that ACL. There was all this talk during the preseason of him being ready for week 1, and I don't even think he was ready for the second playoff game, to be quite honest with you. So with a full off season now to really kick that rehab into high gear and put that injury behind him, I think he's hoping for a breakout season, and obviously the Bills are as well. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with expecting that out of him, though. I mean, what we saw from him last year, it's certainly going to take a huge jump from him this offseason to put some better stuff on tape than we saw from him when he came back from that injury. I think I'm expecting a little bit more out of A.J. Epineza. In the same vein, I think Epineza is expecting a lot out of himself, too, taking a 2-year deal at his age. I think he's hoping to get that big money if he's able to parlay that into a big season this year after a 6-sack season last year. So I think Von Miller's betting on himself. The Bills, that certainly works in their favor. Obviously, the cap savings. I'm not so sure we're going to get 10 sacks out of Von Miller in 2024, however.
AJ Epinesa, I'll tell you what, he had six and a half sacks last year, and he played good. He got hurt when he hurt the ribs. I think his season changed for him. He was not the same player when he came back. Just like DaQuan Jones, he came
and Greg
back
Rousseau
from the
too with the
torque.
foot injury. They sustained a lot of nagging injuries on that defensive line last year, and it really hurt them. And that goes to your point. They really need to shore up the depth at that position this offseason because if one of those guys go down, we saw how much it hurt them last year.
Is it hyperbole to say, we could sit here and talk for 3 hours about this football team and question marks and what kind of offense they're going to have and what kind of defense they're going to look like and what Sean McDermott's philosophy going to be, yada, yada, yada. I kind of feel like we could do a podcast in 25 seconds and say the Buffalo Bills are good enough that what it comes down to more than anything else is health luck. As dumb as that sounds, health luck. This is a team that is, and all teams get hurt, some more than others, but it just seems the Bills get the biggest injuries the last couple of years. And at the most inopportune times, with the most inopportune players, like losing the linebacker. I want to draw a play right now. Terrell Bernard, losing him in the Kansas City game. Like that was like literally backbreaking, which is funny to say that because if I would have said that before week 1, I would be like, what? Terrell Bernard is an important player to the Buffalo Bills? Are you freaking kidding me? But seriously, dude, just health luck, I think, is the most critical part of this football team. And I can say that because I think they're still easily, despite what a lot of national people think, because they've lost name players that got cut, I still think this is a top 5 on paper roster in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the health luck. In that game against the Chiefs, you knew you were going to need a quick player in the middle of the field to help cover Travis Kelce. And you saw what A.J. Klein going into the lineup did. It looked like a turtle chasing a hare. So, and then the year before, DaQuan Jones getting hurt leading into that game against the Bengals in that wintry atmosphere when you had Joe Mixon really clicking on all cylinders for that team, and they were really running the ball really well, and not having DaQuan Jones in that game really hurt them, and they got blown out. So, health luck has certainly not been on the Bills' side. The past couple of years, you lost Matt Milano and DaQuan Jones for the majority of the season. They were able to sustain those injuries, but certainly when Bernard goes down for that playoff game, I mean, what are you going to do with Tyrell Dodson and A.J. Klein as your starting linebackers, and then a green Dorian Williams filling in? He never really seemed to grasp the defense last year. So, yeah, I think a lot of these championships are won based on health luck. The Chiefs did incur their sort of injury misfortune last year, but at the same time, they had Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce healthy at the right time. And granted, the Bills did have Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen, but sure. I think a lot of it comes down to health luck and where you end up in the most critical games of the season.
Agreed 100%. I think it's two things. I think it's health luck, and I think it's your star players playing like stars in the playoffs when it matters the most. And kind of that's what's been the difference between the Chiefs and the Bills. Take the quarterbacks out of the equation. We'll call them a wash because Josh Allen's played great against Kansas City, I think. But it's come down to Kelce and Chris Jones making a bunch of plays and Stefon Diggs and Ed Oliver not. And I feel like that's been the difference between these teams the last few years. And about Von Miller, I will say this. I was encouraged by the Chiefs game. I actually thought he was the best defensive lineman for the Bills against the Chiefs. That's a low bar because the defensive line was not good against the Chiefs. But I saw something in that game, the way he was playing, to make me a little bit more confident going into this offseason with him. Before I let you go, because I know you're a Sabres guy too. They lose Tuesday night, 3-2 in Vancouver. They're 5 points back now, a couple teams ahead of them too, with just 12 games left. Pretty much, unofficially at least anyway, it's a done deal, dude. They played good recently to get back into it. Are you encouraged by this kind of late season run, or are you of the mindset that, things need to be big changes here, man? They put themselves in this hole to begin with. They had high expectations coming in. Does Don Granato keep his job, and should Don Granato keep his job? I guess those might be two different questions for you, but that's how we'll end. What are your thoughts with that?
I never like to call for a person's job or say
Sure.
somebody should be fired, but I certainly think the Sabres need to look into things here. I think the same problems that they've been having over the past few years with Granato at the helm are persisting, and maybe even getting a little bit worse this year. Defense is really been a mystery for them ever since he's taken over, and now their offense has been lacking this year. I think Pat Kane is set to finish the season with more points than Tage Thompson. So things certainly haven't gone well in that regard, especially after Thompson's explosive year last year and the Sabres kind of rebuffing the chance to sign Kane, it seemed like, during the season. So like I said, I don't want to ever call for anybody to be fired or anything like that, but I certainly think that they need to look at not only the coach, but the GM and some of the decisions that both of them have made over the past couple of years and kind of figure out where they've went wrong and why their growth has been stunted, because they have plenty of talent. Look at all the high draft picks that they have, and it's just not working.
Yeah, man, I agree. I don't think Don Granato's losing his job. I really don't. I think they've done enough here over the last month or so that he bought himself another year. Plus, Terry Bagula gave him an extension last year. That hasn't even kicked in yet. So I don't think the owner is eager to just throw money out the door. I think he'll get another year. I'd love to see like Rob Brindamore, if he became available, get that job. And I know, it's the easy name to throw out there, but we'll see with Lindy Ruff. But I don't know. It just seems like a lot of players regressed some this year. And I know
Sure.
a lot of people out there cover the team. Mike Harrington's been very open about it. It's the players' fault. It's not completely wrong, but when it's that many players that ain't getting the job done, isn't it kind of on the coach to get the best out of the players? And if he's not, that's on the coach too, man.
And hockey is really a developmental sport. So yeah,
Sure.
I would definitely maybe more so in a sport like hockey, a sport like baseball, that maybe point more toward the coaching when it comes to player development in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just disappointing. You figure this was going to be the year where you got the Bills to look forward to all season. They're going to make a championship run. That falls a little bit short, but whatever. At least they still were a very good team. They still won their division. They won a playoff game, and then you expected when the season was going to end, the Sabres are going to pick up and really keep us going, and hopefully we'll have our first playoff run in 1,000 years, because that's what it feels like anyway. But obviously, that's just not meant to be. A little disappointing, but what are you going to do? Anyway, all right, it's going to do it for this show. Make sure you follow my man Alex on Twitter at Alex Brasky. Thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on. Good talk today. I look forward to having some drinks with you. And by the way, when I said weirdo places downtown, I was completely joking. I love those bars downtown, man. I'm an older dude, but I never feel old when I actually go to those spots. I love them.
Hey, I'll tell you what, you go to a place like that, the food is always off the charts. It's always impressive.
Yeah, for sure. All right, buddy. Thank you one more time again, Alex. I will be back with a brand new show tomorrow. I'm going to actually have in studio with me Anthony Prohaska from Cover One, and we're going to focus on non-wide receiver prospects with that Bills first round pick. That'll be on tomorrow's show. Talk to you then.